Hello, good evening. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Jessica Ballin, and I'm Town Hall's Community Engagement and Outreach Manager. And on behalf of the staff here at Town Hall Seattle, as well as our friends from Third Place Books, it's my pleasure to welcome you to our presentation with Elaine Lin Hering and Ruchika Tulshyan. Elaine's new book, Unlearning Silence, is the subject of tonight's talk. As we get underway, I would like to acknowledge our institution stands on the unceded traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, particularly the Duwamish. We thank them for our continuing use of the natural resources of their ancestral homeland. We're very glad to have you joining us tonight as part of our 25th anniversary season. Our presentation will run for about 60 minutes, including the Q&A, and when we get to the Q&A portion, you may line up by this microphone. If you want to ask your question in the room, you may scan the QR code that will be on the screen if you'd prefer to type your question on your phone and send it to us that way, or you can click on the link in the chat if you're joining us on the live stream. And no matter how you submit your questions, please keep them concise so that we can get to as many as possible. Town Hall adds new events and podcasts all the time. This Thursday, economist Loretta Napoleoni raises questions about power and influence of tech giants in her new book, Techno-Capitalism. Visit our website or to join our email list to learn about events like these as they're added to our calendar throughout the season. And Town Hall's work is made possible through your support and the support of our sponsors. As part of our Arts and Culture series, this event is supported by For Culture, Arts Fund, the City of Seattle's Office of Arts and Culture, and the City of Seattle's Office of Arts and Culture, period. Town Hall is also a member-supported organization, so I'd like to thank all of the members who are joining us tonight. And if you share Town Hall's vision of a community strengthened by discussions like these about civics, science, and culture, where everyone has a voice, please consider supporting us by donating or becoming a member. We'd love to have you. And lastly, if you don't already have your copy of the book, you can purchase it tonight from the Third Place Books table over in the auto bar, where you can also get it signed. Elaine Lin Hering is a facilitator, speaker, and writer. She works with organizations and individuals to build skills in communication, collaboration, and conflict management. In her career, Elaine has worked on 6 continents and with a wide range of corporate, government, and nonprofit clients. She has trained mental health professionals, political officials, religious communities, and leaders at companies including American Express, Capital One, Google, Nike, Novartis, Shell, Pixar, and the Red Cross. Elaine is a former managing partner of a global leadership development firm and a lecturer on law at Harvard Law School, specializing in dispute resolution, mediation, and negotiation. Ruchika Tulshyan is the author of Inclusion on Purpose, an intersectional approach to creating a culture of belonging at work. Ruchika is also the founder of Candor, an inclusion strategy practice. She is working on her next book, Uncompete, Dismantling a Competition Mindset to Unlock Liberation, Opportunity, and Peace. Please join me in welcoming Elaine Lin Hering and Ruchika Tulshyan.
Thank you so much. And Elaine, welcome to beautiful Seattle.
Thank you for the official welcome.
I had a chat with the weather gods to make sure that you would have this kind of weather. And thank you to all of you for coming inside when the sun is out. I appreciate y'all more than you know. I know the feeling.
Y'all did well.
This is going to be an amazing conversation. So really, really glad that you're here with us. So really to begin, Elaine, your book is called Unlearning Silence. So maybe let's begin with talking about what is silence? What does it mean to you?
I think I'm going to read from the book, a little product placement here, but also because I wordsmithed it a lot. I'm going to back up, if you don't mind, as
Please.
to why silence. Because this whole idea came about usually when you want people to speak up. People say, just speak up, sort of a Nike, just do it version. And that advice was wholly unsatisfying to me and at times feels really irresponsible because it ignores a lot of the factors at play. And as I thought about speaking up, it was, well, why don't we? Because we've learned silence, and because the people around us often continue to silence us. So as any good person trained in law, let's get a definition going. Silence is by definition an absence. Absence of voice, absence of opinion, absence of life. It starts so subtly that we don't even notice it. We withdraw or withhold our real thoughts from the conversation and replace them with what we imagine others want to hear. But because we hold back, and because we don't create safe enough spaces for people to share, we lose the brilliant idea in the brainstorm, or miss the word of caution that would have saved future heart and headache. Silence is also having to hold your tongue to keep the peace, to choose your words to incur only the amount of backlash you can currently bear, to play the role you're given rather than the one you want. Silence is when you're not invited or allowed into the conversation because there's no room, no welcome, or you're not deemed worthy. Silence is being told to shut up and look pretty, or that the only reason you're still here is because they haven't decided to let you go. It's also when no one has thought to invite you and you didn't think you could ask. Silence is when there's not enough air in the room because everyone else's perspectives, personalities, and priorities have already sucked all the energy out. It's overlapping voices that don't include yours and the exhaustion of trying to get in a word edgewise. Silence is when you decide your idea isn't worth saying out loud because the voices in your head have already told you it's stupid, just like the kids at school used to say about you. It's choosing not to disclose information and share opinions because it's not worth the energy, effort, or consequences. Silence is hiding parts of ourselves because they aren't acceptable to others. It's contorting who we are and obscuring who we were meant to be so that other people don't have to face discomfort they don't want. It's denying our own dignity so someone else can have their way. Silence is wanting to create a space where people feel safe and want to speak up, but you can't get them to do so. It's saying that DEI is part of our DNA, but having no idea how to create that genetic makeup. It's wanting to do the right thing, but finding that everything you try is wrong. Silence is the messages we've internalized about what is appropriate, acceptable, or good. Messages we've learned over the course of our lifetimes based on what we've seen, heard, and been rewarded for. Often, silence is the path of least resistance. Too often, it seems the only path. Our habits around silence are so reflexive, we forget we have a choice. When you've learned to live with silence, you forget the possibility of what could be.
Wow. Wow. I mean, I'm speechless on brand for a book about unlearning silence. That's so hard won. Like it comes clearly from a place of being silenced, from telling yourself that you need to remain silent, and then learning to undo both those voices in your own head as well as challenge, the conditioning and the silencing that you've seen around you. How did you do that? How did you come to this place where this book, this moment, this time?
I love that you say, how did I do that, as if I've already done it.
I mean, there's a book.
Fair.
There's a book.
There is a book. The book is also titled Unlearning, ING, rather than I've unlearned, check the box, we're done here.
Yes, absolutely.
Because it is an ongoing process. When I started writing this book, I, honest to God, was not sure I had a voice. Other than I thought this advice that everyone else is giving out about speaking up feels incomplete. It seems like we've actually learned silence. If it's something we've learned and built these habits, it's probably something we could unlearn as well, and started testing that idea out. The first time I ever wrote about Unlearning Silence was an op-ed in the San Francisco Chronicle after Asian women had been shot in Atlanta, and that confronting racism and sexism requires us to unlearn silence. At the time, I had some business partners who I ran a draft by, because that's what we did, and they said, silence as a survival strategy? I don't understand that. Are you talking about COVID? And I quickly texted my best friend saying, is not silence the fundamental strategy of every immigrant to this country? To which she sent back some GIF that was appropriate or inappropriate. So it really has been a process of testing an idea, seeing that it resonates with other people. And in that, I mean, unlearning silence is not an individual sport. It is such a group activity of every time someone hears that and says, oh, that resonates, it is feedback to me of, oh, I might be onto something. And so this process of birthing this book is oh, I guess I do have something to say that just might make a difference. I hope it makes a difference.
Absolutely, it does. And I think one of the things you said to me as we were getting ready for this event is, I thanked you for your courage, for your bravery, right? Seeing you speak up on silence. Just to back up, I grew up in Asia. I'm actually Asian. I grew up in Singapore, where you are very much conditioned, it is in the water you drink, that silence is the way that you behave, right? That's how you move in the world. So for me, this book just resonated so deeply. So seeing you speak up like this, for me, is an act of courage. It's an act of resistance, right? It definitely gave me the courage, and in many of the ways that I'm navigating recently, I've thought of your book so often. But you said to me, but is it really bravery? Is it really courage? Can you share with the audience what you meant by that?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to go on one of my favorite rants. Right? So often in terms of speaking up, people say, well, you need more courage, you need more confidence. If you're a woman, go fix yourself. If you had more courage, if you had more confidence, then you would be heard, then you might get that promotion, then fill in the blank. I love that you're doing color commentary with the eye rolls. Please keep them coming.
I'm no good. The silence part on the face.
We are unlearning that.
My mom will tell you, so since well before I was a teenager, the eye rolls were the eyebrows as well.
And yet, so much of the advice around leadership and personal development is have more courage, have more confidence. Courage is necessary but not sufficient. Courage can only...
Say that again.
This is also my legal training,
Yes.
Necessary but not sufficient. It was a very expensive legal education, so let's milk it for all it's
Yes.
worth. Courage is necessary but not sufficient.
Beautiful.
If other people are fundamentally unwilling to hear you, unwilling to change, it doesn't matter how courageous you are. So to me, writing this book, I get disoriented a little bit when people say, you're so courageous, you're so brave, because I think, well, sure, there's some element of that, but to me, this was pure calculation. That makes me sound maybe more conniving than I actually am.
Which we need more women to be more
Conniving?
strategic.
Strategic
is
nice,
the word, right?
Nice rebrand. Because if all of the advice out there is saying just speak up, fix yourselves, there's a whole industry built around that is incredibly profitable. Imposter syndrome, if you haven't read Ruchika's fantastic Harvard Business Review article, Stop Telling Women They Have Imposter Syndrome, go read it. If that's the advice out there and I have an idea that seems more accurate and in the beta testing that I've done, resonates and actually could unlock a more honest conversation of what is the silence I've learned that I can own and unlearn? In what ways are you silencing me? That is not my work to do, but is yours, your responsibility as a leader to actually support rather than silence me, the person you lead. And silence is baked into our systems, into our policies and practices. No amount of courage is going to overcome something that is fundamentally baked into, as you're talking about growing up in Singapore, the fabric of the culture. But what we could do is take an honest look at who do these policies support, who do they silence, and that intellectual honesty gets us somewhere. So as a matter of being strategic or calculating, it seemed irresponsible not to write this book. People say, well, you're living the dream. I identify as an accidental author. I never intended to write a book. That was never the dream. And if Unlearning Silence is a way that we get to belonging, dignity, and justice, not just for a privileged few, but for human beings, that's worth fighting for. That's worth, I mean, we've joked about and talked about how arduous a process it is to write a book.
Yeah, really. Yeah. This is not the shortcut way to unlearn silence.
No.
Right? Like, there is such a process to birth a book. And what's really, again, fascinating about, specifically the topic of unlearning silence is within books and within being a published author, so much of the process is about maintaining like a very specific, like a very like canned sort of way that you talk about your book, about your work. And it's not about unlearning silence. And I think some of the things that you have said, in some of your media interviews, have been really, really powerful. There's this quote, I even wrote it in your book, where, you've been told, like, stop being political. And you say, I can't, because so many people have really made my existence is political, right? Like my existence itself is political. Can you kind of elaborate on that? And what a beautiful line, by the way.
To be a woman in male-dominant spaces is political. To be born in Taiwan is political. To be Christian in America is political. Not because of anything I've done, but because of what those identities and the assumptions around it and what role they play in our conversation, in our society. But the mere presence of being an Asian American woman in many, at many of these tables is threatening. Voice is not just the words that we say, but voice is how we move through the world, including the identities we carry. Voice is also inherently a status-claiming activity. But for that claim to happen, people have to also accept your claim. So I can't stop being political because I can't stop being me, even if I try to strip away those identities. And one of my favorite pieces, well, not a favorite, one of the most memorable pieces of feedback I ever received was be more man-like.
What does that even mean? I'm just
Right.
trying to, I'm just trying to understand, like, what this person was trying to.
Yeah, we did unpack
Say.
it because it was in the context of me teaching, unironically, a feedback workshop. I appreciate that chuckle. As we unpacked it, after the triggered responses around it, it was take up more space, like use the full physicality of the room. We were in a large ballroom with 300 people, and so use your full wingspan. For the men or male identifying people in the room, apparently that is the core of your identity, is use your full wingspan. And it's a good call to action for each of us to think about the language that we use, not because we'll always get it perfect, but to your question, what do you actually mean, rather than what might you say? And what impact does it have? And can I own my contribution to the conversation if it doesn't, if I say, be more man-like, A, notice that, B, unpack it. And what I mean by that would be a useful addition to the conversation.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm thinking so much, I'm like thinking of that moment where Oprah said to Meghan Markle, "Were you silent or were you silenced?" Right? And I think that is such a beautiful, like, one-liner, which in many ways, I really had that quote as I was reading your book. I think you do a really good job of navigating that tension. It's a reality, right? Because so much of the advice we get as women, so much of what I've been trying to push back against in my career is this sort of lean in, be more confident, all of that, like undo your imposter syndrome and then you'll be good and successful. And I think you do such a good job of saying, like, yes, there is a part of us that needs to unlearn that silence. And yes, there is also a very big part that organizations and leaders and structures and systems of power and oppression play in silencing us. So I was wondering if you can kind of talk about how people can, identify and evaluate that tension when they're making that decision of unlearning silence.
Can you also do more Oprah impressions, please?
That was not
pretty
even
impressive.
close to an Oprah impression, but it's just.
Thanks for bringing all of the options here.
Yes.
So to start, my operating assumption is that we all have learned some version of silence, and that if we're human beings, we end up silencing other people. Not because we're bad people, not because we're ill-intentioned, even though some people might be, but because human nature is to assume that other people are like us and wired like us and communicate like us. So one way we incline other people towards silence is to expect them or require them to look and sound like us in order to be heard, right? So let me really own that I am someone both who silences myself and has that impact on other people, which is part of why the book is structured as awareness and then action. Action without full awareness is less likely to stick in terms of behavioral change, all that good stuff. And if I'm really honest with myself, have I said the thing to someone else? Researchers call it the illusory truth effect, right? If you have repeated something enough times, you start to believe it to be true. Really dangerous in terms of politics these days. And if I think about the colleague that I'm annoyed with, I've vented to my friends. I've talked with other coworkers. Can you believe that they did that? Probably talked to the guy at the grocery store when they asked me how my day was, because I was really annoyed at them.
I have no idea what you're talking about, by the way.
You're a better person than I am.
Sarcasm.
And have I actually had the conversation with my colleague? Or do I just believe that I have said it? And to be honest, that it's safer in my head. If I get to keep the conversation in my head, I have more control over it. I get to write the script about who you are and how you're going to show up. And by the way, I cast you as the villain. But if I bring that conversation externally into reality with you, there's a whole lot of uncertainty. And I don't like uncertainty. My brain doesn't like uncertainty. I like control. But in what ways have I actually stayed silent? And I'm not actually engaging with reality, engaging with you, and we end up in these siloed worlds of our own, where there's no crossbreeding, no cross-pollination, no real connection.
I'm so glad you said that, because again, you mentioned the word politics, and I was just thinking about how much, especially in this election year, we're really at this time where it's so important to be able to have those conversations and not have them just in our heads and make up these stories where people are the villain, right? And really have that conversation. What advice do you have for people to really begin having some of those conversations, cross difference especially?
Yeah. It actually takes us back to our earlier conversation around calculation. if we knew when we shared a thought that it would be well received, that the other person might even appreciate us, that there wouldn't be blowback or defensiveness, and we would leave more connected, not because we agree, but because we understand each other and see each other as human, how much more likely would we, in that instance, be to actually share what we think? So to me, it is less about each of us speaking up, although it is a conscious act to choose to share. And chapter 3 is all about when silence makes sense, so it's my favorite chapter. Let's be honest that there are times that silence makes sense. But what can we do to unlearn the ways we silence each other? We can co-create that opportunity to be heard, even if we look, sound, see each other differently. That, to me, is the opportunity that each of us can take on and provide for each other.
That's beautiful. And do you have a story of, from your own life or from someone you've met in this process or even detailed in your book, where there was this very, I don't want to say beautiful, but a very profound journey of, whether they were conditioned to be silenced or whether they were silenced or whether they silenced themselves, to how they unlearned silence and what happened then?
I have been so profoundly grateful with people's willingness to share stories.
I'm sure.
And also feel like they're not mine to tell. So I'll tell my own story.
Please.
Which is going from not believing I had a voice to actually writing this book, to someone saying, excuse me, you realize the ripple effect, don't you? Because silence is not just what we don't say, right? We silence ourselves in what we don't say, but we also silence our identities, the parts of who we are. We also silence the things that we need, right? In terms of self-advocacy, am I willing and able to identify what I need? And asking that radical question in each moment. What do I think? What do I need? That actually reminds us that we are humans, because the world around us doesn't always treat us that way, right? You're the robot, make the widget.
Especially in this town, we're a tech town. We're a tech town, and I know you're visiting us from the Bay. And
I wasn't going to judge your town.
Yeah,
you gave me good weather.
And it's just, for me, I think that so much of like this journey, and it really is a journey. I mean, you really recount this journey into unlearning silence. I mean, what are some of those lessons that you've learned that you can share with the audience about unlearning silence and that journey?
That the risk is worth it.
Wow. That the risk is worth it.
So for anyone who might be touched by an idea I'm sharing here today, this idea started from a place of self-doubt of, is there something here? Is this useful at all? And there's so many beautiful nuances to this story, including some people in this room who saw something in this idea and believed in it. And I will take credit for myself where credit is due, which is, someone said, you've just got to start posting on LinkedIn. I had been given the advice from people in my life before of, you don't need to be on social media. If your content is good enough, you don't need to be out there. Can I take your face with me everywhere, Ruchika?
Oh gosh, I think I've got to the stage where I don't even know I'm doing it.
So good.
Sorry.
It's so good. Anyways, I ended up on LinkedIn, right? And that nudge to say something, and it's I don't know what people in this room think, but it's terrifying. It's public. the people I work with, my employer, the judgment. It's not, anonymous bot world. And also, the more that you do it, there's such a spotlight effect of, actually, the algorithm means that basically no one sees my posts anyways.
That's not true. I see your posts.
But also, we so focus on the cost and the discomfort, and we don't have an accurate calculation on the potential benefit. And so many of the beautiful interactions and the affirmation and the encouragement that I was onto something came from random strangers on LinkedIn. And this whole publishing story is just, I'm waiting for Shonda Rhimes to make a Netflix special about it. So, Shonda, if you're listening.
Well, you have to share the story then for us to, for Shonda to hear and contact. And I'll play any part. My face will play any part in this mini series. Hey.
Apparently you're getting cast as Oprah. Just FYI, we figured out that piece of it, right? So we had this book proposal. My agent went out with it. Apparently the way that these things, and I had no idea about how this world worked, and I thought, just need one publisher to be interested. And the worst that can happen is no one's interested, and I'm actually no worse off than when I started, but at least let me try. And then these calendar invites started popping up on my calendar, and I said to my agent, what are these? She said, oh, they're publishers who want to meet with you. And then more calendar invites started coming. And apparently the purpose of these meetings was like kick the tires, make sure that you know what you're talking about, that you can hold your own. And at some point, the meetings turned into publishers pitching me. Like I got a deck saying, we publish Simon Sinek, and here's what we would do with your book. And I was like, this isn't what you told me these meetings were about. This isn't going as script. I met with 16 publishers.
Woo.
The book went to auction. Amongst 12 publishers.
Amazing.
Ended up selling global rights to Penguin Random House. They started selling translation rights of the book even before it was written. I mean, this didn't exist, and then I was like, oh shoot, I have to deliver. And even, we talked a little bit about this, there were times in writing the book that I would write my editor being like, Meg, I think I can write. And I didn't know that about myself, because I had spent so much of my life trying to sound like someone else. So much of my life trying to fit in and represent a different organization or entity, to emulate, to be a good imitation of someone else is where I thought I got my value from. And how many of us end up doing that? Because our mothers have expectations. Hi, Mom, if you're listening, I'm a little worried.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Everyone has expectations for us, but the thing about trying to live into someone else's expectations is that they hold the power because they can continue to change the goalpost. And we've spent a lifetime trying to be someone else other than who we are. So if voice is not just the words that we say, but how we move through the world, and we each have one life to live, how are we choosing to move through the world?
As I got towards the end of the book, then the sort of aha moment for me was the biggest benefit, at least what I felt when I read this book, was the benefit of speaking up when you're doing that risk-benefit analysis is if you speak up, those who need you will find you, and those who you need will find you, right? And I think that's something that we in our culture we don't talk about enough, right? And even you talking about unlearning silence as a group exercise, as a group versus the individual, right? Like it's easy to pick up this book and think, oh, now I can make presentations, or I can, come on to stage, or I can be, I can lead my company or whatnot. But as you read the book and as you really grapple with some of the ways both that you were silenced and then really pushed against that and found your community in speaking up was like this deep humility, right? This deep feeling of like, it's not about me anymore. It's not about me speaking up in that one meeting or speaking up against injustice that one time. It is unlocking and catalyzing a community to be able to speak up when needed.
We are co-creating a different culture. If what so many of us operate in is a culture of silence, each of our actions can either perpetuate that culture of silence, reinforce it, or disrupt it, to build a culture of voice that allows for freedom and agency to be who we are. The other piece of it, though, is that silence contributes to social isolation.
Huge topic.
And the Surgeon General and many others have done great research around loneliness as this next epidemic of thinking it's just me. I'm the problem. If I could just fix myself, versus, oh, you too? You struggle with that too. So in the book, I talk about it as the double pain, that whether it is getting laid off from a job or getting a diagnosis or navigating anything difficult, there's that initial pain. But there is a double pain, much like a badge in Mario Kart, for any Mario Kart players there, that amplifies the pain. That double pain of, I can't talk about it with anyone. I can't tell anyone because they'll know I can't hack it. They'll know that I'm weak. There's such pressure in this individualistic society to pretend that we can do it alone. None of us can do it alone. And so even if we can't solve for that initial pain, can we solve or reduce the double pain? And can we disrupt the social isolation that, having to edit out a part of yourself keeps your nervous system on chronic high alert. It has the health impact that is comparable to obesity in shortening one's lifespan. It's real. And to me, the opportunity of unlearning silence is, oh, you too? You experience that as well. It's not just me. We can then see systemic issues, we can see patterns, we can see themes, and we are all more connected. And acknowledging our common humanity in those issues.
Thank you for that. I'm going to ask you a question about how organizations can create and leaders can create, really a culture of voice, as you call it. I want to plant the seed for anyone who has a question. Please keep that at the top of your mind. We're going to go to your questions really soon. For those of you online, or if you want to submit a question, I will get it on this iPad. So please go ahead with that as well. But let's definitely have you talk about how leaders can create that climate of voice.
I'm thinking of where to start, because chapter 5 of the book is ways we silence other people. Chapter 9 is stop silencing people. So there's a checklist of 9 ways that we all, intentionally or unintentionally, silence other people. So from a very practical, tactical, action-oriented perspective, I would have leaders go down the checklist, be like, do I think I'm doing that? 2 ways, though, that leaders tend to silence other people. One is just fundamentally underestimating how hard it can be to speak up. And I've facilitated this conversation over and over, typically across lines of race. So older white man will listen to a younger, potentially woman of color colleague being like, oh, I had no idea that you would hesitate to say something. Because of course, we as human beings tend to assume that people are like us. So if our voices have been normed, if our voices have been welcome, unless we are aware and conscious of it, in our unconscious, we assume that everyone is like us and everyone has had the same experience. And, the colleague is like, I'm remembering when I went to McDonald's when I was 7 years old and they gave us cold French fries and I really wanted to ask for a replacement and my sister told me that we shouldn't because we shouldn't be difficult, right? Our learned silence is so deep and so often unconscious, which to me is the opportunity of bringing it into the conscious so that we can make choices going forward of who we want to be and who we are becoming rather than who we've been. And part of that discernment process, you may realize I really like who I've been and what I've learned serves me well, fantastic. And if not, to remember that we at least have a choice going forward. The second way that leaders can create more of a culture of voice is really thinking about how we design our communication patterns. If we don't actively design the way that we communicate, are we on Zoom, are we in person, are we typing, are we texting, are we talking, then we tend to default to the communication patterns and preferences of the people with the most power. And if you're not wired in the same way, then we incline the people who are not wired in that way towards silence because there's a barrier to entry to the conversation. Often in corporate spaces, it sounds like in order to be heard, you need to, we've got it from the audience, speak in 3 succinct bullet points with just the right, by the way, no ums, just the right amount of emotion to show that you care, but not too much emotion that you lose credibility. Am I right? Anything you'd add?
The number of times in my life that I've been told I just need to speak up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can we just repeat that?
Yeah, the number of times in their life they've been told to just speak up. Except when I spoke up, I was told that I was too loud, I was too quiet, I was too emotional, I was too fill in the blank, you just can't get it right.
I need to speak my needs, but then when I do, I'm
Yes.
too loud or I'm not speaking clearly enough. So I know exactly what you're saying.
Speak your needs. I'll just repeat it for those on live stream. Speak your needs, but then when you did, you were told you were too loud. Fill in the blank, right? So going back to what leaders can do, actively, do you know what communication mediums and modes make it easiest for the people on your team to communicate their thoughts? That's a 30-second conversation in a one-on-one. Put it on the agenda. And do you acknowledge that differences in how we communicate often come down to wiring rather than weakness? So I don't know about people in this room, I'm a post-processor. What I mean by that is 20 minutes after, in the meeting I can't quite figure out what I want to say, 20 minutes after the meeting I'm like, that's what I wanted to say. Okay, I'm seeing lots of nods here, some really raised hands. Welcome to the club, post-processors. Then there are real-time processors. Somehow, in romantic relationships, real-time processors
I was
find
just thinking that.
post-processors, and it annoys the hell out of everyone. Real-time processors, maybe I'm talking about the two of you right there. Okay, you're welcome. You didn't know this, but this is an intervention. Seattle Town Hall arranged this just for you. The city really cares about real-time processors.
Yeah.
Real-time processors, the more you talk, the clearer it gets. Post-processors, the more you talk, the more I'm like, shut the please up. Just give me that time. Yeah. Some people say, like, I just need to get to the shower because I do my best thinking in the shower, right? I don't want you in the shower with me. Yeah. We're getting really graphic here. I didn't mean for that to be that way, right? But can we, so often in corporate spaces, real-time processors are held up as leaders, as more agile on their feet. If we want the best ideas, not just the fastest ideas, not just quick thinking, but also slow thinking, how do we design the way that we meet, that we communicate, so that voices that communicate most clearly by typing are just as respected as those that communicate best by talking? Rather than saying, you're weak, go fix yourself. And leaders have the opportunity to design, do you know how the people on your team best communicate, what makes it easiest for them. It's not to say that you then can only communicate to them in that way, but that awareness of, oh, let's wait 20 minutes. Or we're in a meeting, this is where we're circling to a conclusion. Let's everyone go sleep on it because we've designed this rather than being reactive. And if things come up for you, when things come up for you in your post-processing, using that language to normalize it, put it, reply all on that email thread. So you have reduced the barriers by making clear where people should go, how they communicate those thoughts. You've normalized the difference in wiring, and you fundamentally get different ideas.
And it's so inclusive to do that. Like, I just think, again, of being someone who was born outside this country, that, again, I was socialized that you would never challenge, someone with more status or power or privilege or, hierarchy. It's certainly not in the meeting, right? The importance of saving face for them and yourself, which is really a concept I grew up with. And so having those avenues would just have made so many more meetings, so many more interactions, more inclusive to even someone like myself.
I love that you name that because, again, going back to assumptions, do we as leaders assume that if someone has something to say, they would say it? Do we assume, different assumption would be, I need to be invited into the conversation, that I can't say it publicly because I need to save face for you? Particularly when we're working cross-culturally, and culture is not just ethnic background or geography, but each family culture that we grew up in, we bring into our interactions, our relationships going forward. So can we clarify those operating assumptions? If we're a leader who wants to hear from the people on our team, needing to actually say that more than once, needing to back up that invitation with action, because just because you've said it doesn't mean I actually believe it. I often still have my last manager or my uncle or whoever, fill in the blank, who, yeah, they said that, but it's not really true, right?
Thank you. That was really meaningful. We are down to like the last 14 minutes, and I want to make sure that anyone who has a question, you get a chance. So if you're in the room and you're able, please do come up to the microphone so that we can hear you when you ask your question. If you'd rather just say it out loud or type it up and share it with us, I will get it on this lovely iPad. But for anyone who has a question, now is a good time to please come up to the microphone and ask it. And of course, please make sure it's a question and a succinct one. But if there's anyone, please, I invite you to come up to this microphone and ask your question. Do we have someone who's questioning? Yes, thank you.
Way to take one for the team.
Yes.
It's always that first
Yes,
person.
it's that first one. Yes, thank you.
Sorry. What do you think the best first step is in breaking through people's assumptions that their story is not important?
There's a line in the book that I fought really hard for. And the line goes something like, the world may not say this to you, but let me say it to you. Your thoughts, needs, goals, concerns, and your story matters. So it's in print, and I fought the editor really hard for it, so know that I fought it for you. That's one, because we don't hear that enough in our day-to-day. The other thing that often can be helpful is this what if. What if I had a voice? If I had a voice, what would I do? If my story were to matter, what would I do? And that what if, or if it were to, gives us just a little, it's like a psychology trick, right? Gives us a little bit of space. between that. But I also would go back to our earlier conversation of what if someone else needs to hear your story? So often it's hard for us to think about, it feels selfish almost to share my story, to take up space if that's not what we're used to. And for many of us, we're others oriented. So this is also a little bit of a mental hack of, if you don't want to do it to serve yourself, even though that would be completely legitimate and potentially therapeutic, right? And advised by medical professionals that are not me. But you are motivated by serving other people. What difference might it make in someone else's life? Because our common humanity says to me that each of our stories have power, and each of our stories intersect with each other. That's where I'd start. Thanks for asking the question.
Thank you.
Hi, Elaine.
Hi.
I'm having a fanboy moment. It's going to be okay. My name's Jimmy Wolf, and I'm curious if you would talk to me a little bit, or talk to the audience a little bit about, we all understand the impacts of intersectionality, and that they occur simultaneously, like each one having its own whole thing. How would you say that that impacts our willingness and ability, depending on our intersections, to show up with a voice?
Fantastic question. So, do you want to give us an official definition of intersectionality? Would you?
Absolutely. I mean, certainly drawing from the beautiful work of Professor Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989, who talked about how our various intersecting identities, really compound and exacerbate our experience, especially in the workplace. And she specifically centered the experience of Black women who face bias and discrimination, often not just as women, but not just as Black people, but as Black women. And so how those intersecting identities impact our experience, how they compound the experiences we have in the workplace and how we move through the world, we need to consider that when we make any decisions, right?
Thank you. It's really wonderful to have an inclusion expert on hand.
Thank you.
Didn't mean exclusion. And the way I think about it in the book is drawing on Beverly Tatum's work of subordinated identities and dominant identities. So anytime in an ecosystem, dominant identities are normalized. You get the benefit of the doubt. You often create the norms of what is or are. Subordinated identities inherently have an uphill battle. You're more likely to be othered and doubted, and intersectionality with those subordinated identities just magnifies all of that. To me, it goes back to the work then of what ecosystem are we creating around people who carry subordinated identities. Not necessarily for them specifically, but what world are we co-creating, because a lot of these identities are also non-visible, or people may choose not to disclose. So as leaders, going back to your question, what world are we creating? Including, are we clear about what the norms are? So the dominant identities have the benefit of, oh, I know how this works, or this is how it's always worked. This is what happens on the golf course. And if you're not on the golf course, then you don't actually know those norms. So what is invisible, making that visible, making the avenues clear, having values that we articulate so that you have something to anchor to, rather than having to figure it out by trial and error over time. That's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it, to me, would be listen. If people in your ecosystem who carry subordinate identities take the risk to actually voice an opinion, listen. Rather than what we're so often met with, which is doubt, which is prove it, which is, by the way, we need quantitative data, not just qualitative data. Yes. So can we listen and receive that perspective as the gift that it is, because it included such disproportionate risk to even surface it.
Thank you so much, Elaine. I did see someone moving, but there is a question here on the screen that I'd love to ask from someone online. What do you make of the concept of professionalism as it pertains to choosing when to speak, what to say, and how authentic to be? Oof. I can't wait to hear your answer to this.
I know, I was trying to channel my best Ruchika face in that.
Professionalism, my favorite word.
We're going to have to breathe through this one.
Okay, let's do it.
Take a moment.
We have 5 minutes, by the way. just
Okay,
FYI.
noted. Thank you. That was my next
That
question of
helps,
how long
right?
do we have?
How long do we have?
Let's interrogate what we hold as professional. Where do those standards come from? Where do the definitions come from? So often, be professional is used like, be more manlike. It is a standard of that's not done here, or that's not what should be done here. It is the definition of professional is driven by those who carry dominant identities. And so often that can mean anyone who carries a subordinate identity, edit out those parts of yourself because they are not welcome here. It is a way of control. It is a way of conformity. And so I would and let's acknowledge that as a society, we need to have certain norms for how we operate and have a way of understanding those. So I'd start by interrogating, what do we mean by professional? Professionalism. In what ways is professionalism used and weaponized against people who don't fit those molds? I'd start there, and I'm going to pause.
Yeah.
What would you add?
Well, I was really going to say that even on this concept of like this idea of authenticity, right? How authentic to be. I think of that often.
Bring your full self to work, just not that part. Right? Be authentic. Again, I would interrogate terms of what do we mean by authentic, because authentic can mean real. It can mean all the parts of yourselves. And I've long made the observation that vulnerability feels like a luxury good for white people. And so when we talk about authenticity, what are we really meaning? And can we acknowledge that getting to be who you are and say what you think is not a privilege that everyone has, is not, there are different costs, which leads us back to calculation of we could change and diminish those costs such that how you show up could be accepted, could be normed, or we could be really intellectually honest about this is the culture we're building, this is what we expect. To work here or be part of this community means this, rather than people having to try to find out the hard way, especially if in one breath we say, be your authentic self, bring your full self to work, and then in action it's but not that part.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you the closing question because we are, this hour just really flew by, as I knew it would. I wanted to ask you about a time where you felt most proud that you unlearned silence, right? And I'm actually going to add, and not this amazing book, because I'm so proud you did that. What's a moment for you that maybe others don't know about?
So this is not a plug for it, let me be really clear, but I have a monthly newsletter, and I dropped an F-bomb in it. I got a text from my father.
So yes, extremely scandalous.
No joke. Right, I am the youngest daughter of an immigrant family from Taiwan. I learned a lot of silence. It served me really well. I am a great entry-level worker. Statistically speaking, you want to hire me, right? Doesn't serve me so well later on career paths. But I didn't really swear until my 30s because it was beat out of me, right? You don't do that. Good girls don't swear was what I learned. And my very supportive parents are subscribed to this newsletter. So when I sent out that email, I got a text from my father saying, "Are you sure you want to use a curse word?" And I flashed back to being 13, right? It takes us back so quickly. And I chose to unlearn silence, and I said yes, because that's how people think. Right? Do we not all curse at work often? Right? And so it was in italics too, right? It was supposed to signal that it was a thought inside. And it was also a moment to say, no, I actually do know what I'm doing. I've worked a lot in corporate spaces. I know that this is true. I am trying to make a point that resonates and I know is true of what we think, but don't often say, and I'm trying to get to the root of that. And as much as I respect you, dear Father, yeah, I did use that word.
That is amazing.
To his credit, he said, okay.
I am so glad you shared this story because, you know, the way that it ended reminds me, yes, there are costs. I mean, you and I have talked offline about whistleblowers and people who have I'm a former journalist. I have just seen and reported on some things. And the fact that it ended with someone who is of authority in your life saying, okay, like, I think sometimes we forget that. I think it's so easy to forget that it'll be okay.
Yeah, and okay can be interpreted in many different ways.
Right.
And I will say it is okay because it is renegotiating those relationships. I am not 13 anymore.
Yes.
I don't live in the same household. I have grown. My father has also grown. I mean, that's the beautiful piece of it, that we have come a long way. And sometimes it takes saying, yeah, I did do that. And I stand by it, and I'm okay with it. You may or may not be okay with it, but we'll leave it there. We don't need to further engage.
Yeah. And I think of that in the workplace, by the way, as well, right? Like, I think, again, there's this feeling of like, would it be okay if I did, right? And at some point saying, like, this is what I did, and you've got to be okay with it.
So much asking of permission that is wired into us right at school. You have to ask permission to go to the bathroom. You have to ask permission from HR to take time off work. Who do we really need to ask permission from? And sometimes is it asking permission from ourselves or giving ourselves permission to be?
Thank you so much, Elaine Lin Hering, for gracing Seattle with your presence and bringing the sunshine to us. And thank you so much, this wonderful audience in person and online. We appreciate you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Doing a quick book signing, and so Elaine's books are right here, thanks to Third Place Books, and thank you so much to Town Hall Seattle for this event. Thank you.